Hey, welcome to the Narrate podcast. I'm Caleb, part of the Narrate team. This week is part one of a series called Speak. Words are powerful. They have the power to change lives, but they can also be very destructive. This week, Adam challenges us on our words.
How you doing? Is there any snow out there? Wow. Do you ever forget to wear deodorant? I might have done that today. It's terrible. So afterwards, you want to go talk to Caleb or someone back there, but don't come anywhere near the front of the stage. It's really not a good experience. I usually carry some in my backpack, but then I went to LA a couple weeks ago, and, they might confuse it for a bomb, so I took it out of my backpack, and now I just stink. So, hi, how you doing? So I was cross-country skiing. We talked about this a little bit before, but there's a story from there that I think can help us jump into this conversation. Over Christmas, my family and then my sister and a couple of her girls and then my dad and my stepmom, we went cross-country skiing in Red Lodge. And my sister, so we have 3 boys. My sister has 3 girls. Wow, is that a study in gender differences? And the youngest girl is in 1st grade, and she just doesn't stop talking. Is that normal for girls? It is just non-stop. If something is happening inside of her skull, her mouth is moving. Well, so this was the first time she'd ever been cross-country skiing before. And so it was just continuous, whether it was fear or excitement or, wow, I don't know what's happening to me. Could I have that? I think I need to stop drinking tea because then I start sounding like a... Anyway, so she just jab, and if she's mad, and just peck. So I hung out with her for about 10 seconds, and then I went and skied with a different part of the group. But my dad, he wasn't the greatest listener when I was growing up. I don't think any better, more so than any man. But he just kind of hung with her all day long, and she just and he just. But towards the end of the day, she was finally wearing out. And she stopped talking, and then it was getting a little tiring and a little frustrating, and we were actually at the top of this big hill where you shouldn't... Cross-country skiing is weird, right? Because there's no edges, and so hills are what are challenging, and there's this big hill, and she was starting to get sloppy and messing up a lot, and so he finally took the chance, because she wasn't talking, to coach her a little bit and say a few things, and he only got a few words in, though, because then she turned and she looked at him, and she said, "Grandpa Steve, you have got to stop talking so much. She said, if you don't, I'm going to get an ear infection." So fun raising little boys. I love it. Just kidding. So anyways, what we're going to dive into in this conversation is words, and the words we say, and the words we hear, and the words we think, and the words we do and don't listen to. And I'm really excited. This is going to take us into the middle of March. But I think the best way to start it would just be to say, when you think of yourself as a talker, how's that going for you? When you think of your history as a talker, you think of the history of the words that you've spoken from the very first ones until the last ones that you've said most recently. How you doing? And maybe even more poignantly, amongst, hopefully you've said things that were very wise, very profound, very helpful, things that made relationships better. But can I ask this? We're going to kind of drill down on maybe a little heavier stuff this morning. Have you ever said something that you regret? It's kind of a dumb question, isn't it? Can you think already of a relationship that, we all understand we're supposed to be vulnerable and we're supposed to be people who make mistakes and then ask for forgiveness and all the different things. But can you think of a relationship that just never recovered from something you said? Now, maybe it was something that needed to be said. That's something we'll talk more about in a couple weeks. Maybe it was something that you shouldn't have said. Can you think of a circumstance, an opportunity that just went away because of something you said? The doors opened and your mouth opened and an arrow came out and all that was beautiful and good and hopeful and promising was gone. The opportunities. Can you think of one of those? When we think about ourselves as in the history that we have with words, here's what I find encouraging is I've been researching this, and there's TED Talks on it and read books on it and looked at scripture on it. Here's maybe the most encouraging thing I ran into was James, Jesus' half-brother, which I love James, and I love the book of James. Part of what's brilliant about the book of James is James was Jesus' half-brother, but he didn't even believe in Jesus. He didn't believe Jesus. I think he believed he existed, he grew up with him, but he didn't believe that Jesus was God until after the resurrection, which for me really helps validate the historicity of the resurrection and the importance of it. And I think if you can convince the person that you grew up with that you're God, then you probably were, right? Because that's pretty hard to do. You can convince me you're amazing, and I can convince you I'm amazing, but That's because you don't live with me, and I don't live with you. With me? So anyway, James said, if anyone, it's like he goes, you want to talk about who's perfect? I'll tell you who's perfect. The person who's never said something dumb before. I think the way he literally says it is the person who is never at fault in what they've said is like a perfect person, able to keep their whole body in check. Now for me, I think that means that we can breathe this deep sigh of relief, because what that says is we're all in this together. When it comes to words and the words we say and the mistakes we make with words, we can all relate. And part of what we'll circle back to at the end is what's brilliant about what James says is he says, man, I don't know how you would have any hope of having a tight rein on your tongue, which is something else he says, without God's help. Like, I just don't know how you'd do that. I would agree with him. In fact, if you're looking to read more on it, James chapter 3, and I'm not an expert on anything, but amongst all the research, and I've been researching this since this summer, it's still the best stuff I've found on the tongue. It's just brilliant. And if you haven't read the Bible before, you're kind of going like, hey, I'd like to read the Bible again. The book of James can be the best place to start. It's towards the back of your Bible. If you get to Revelation, go left, because that'll be confusing. But get to James, very straightforward, very practical, no like flowery, none of that stuff. I mean, he just kind of hammers you these principles. It's very, very good. So words. James is an expert. And I think his expertise tells us none of us are experts. Now let me ask you this. When you think about your history with words, does that history just include words that you've said? It doesn't, does it? Like your history with language, your history with being a talker, your history with hearing words, well, it involves hearing words as well, doesn't it? In fact, part of what I'm understanding, some of you know that a couple weeks ago, I talked about this on Christmas Eve, but the week before last, I was at psychotherapy in LA. It was like this leadership intensive, and I jokingly called it psychotherapy. Jokes on me, it was psychotherapy. It was brilliant. It was really, really good. If I was a billionaire, I'd send all of you. But part of what I'm starting to understand is every word you've ever heard fits into one of two categories. Like it either served you and strengthens you and somehow complements everything God wants you to become, or it inhibits you. Now, there's lots of them that are subconscious, but if you've ever read Jesus and Jesus says, you'll be accountable for every word you've ever spoke. The reason is because what guys like psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists understand is every word you've ever heard has an impact on you. It's in there, which means every word you've heard, it fits into this category. Either you treasure it. Can you think of those? Like things that were said to you, maybe you were in grad school, maybe you were in college, maybe you were a kid, and someone said something to you, and you just like, wow, you don't know why you even remember that. But on your darkest days, like you just hold on to it. Can you think of those? I hope you can, because if you can't, then you probably need to be medicated, because that would just be so depressing if we don't have these moments. I was thinking of it this week, and when I was in 7th grade, I suppose just like most 7th grade boys, what I love about 7th grade sports as I look back is it's not about how athletic you are, it's about how aggressive you are. You know what I mean? Like in high school, okay, you got to kind of be good, but in 7th grade, you just got to be mean enough to like want the ball more than everybody else, and you're going to be successful. Can you agree with me on that? Because you guys are all apparently very athletic. So when I was in, I couldn't shoot a jump shot to save my life. I could shoot a layup and I could dribble the ball a little bit. And I had this great coach. His name was Roger, which says something. We didn't have to call him Mr. or anything, and that's because he worked in the business office of our school district in Laurel. But their offices were in the middle school. And I'll bet he was in his lower 30s when I was in 7th grade. Classic 80s mullet, really nice guy. What I learned later, and this says something about him, was when he was fresh out of college, he actually, in his first job, coached a Class C school to a state championship. So he knew basketball, and he was humble enough to coach 7th grade now that he ended up in Laurel. And he just kind of took me under his wing when I was in 7th grade. You don't see those things when you're that kid, but as a parent, you go, I hope someone does that for my kid. And that's just what he did. He made me the point guard. I was the starting point guard, and I brought the ball down the floor, and he taught me how to run the offense. He taught me the importance of being the first one down the court in either direction. He taught me how to read a cheap rebound and go get the cheap rebound. He taught me about the importance of getting on the ball, on the ground for a loose ball. And like I was just his guy there because I had the tenacity. I just didn't have any skill. And at the end of the year, you know how you have those corny banquets or whatever, and we had one of those corny banquets, and I was honestly shocked because I did not show up in the stat sheet. Like every once in a while I'd get a cheap layup or something like that, but there's nothing to speak of. And I remember he gave me the what was called the AAA award. Don't remember what the A's stand for, but I just remember I got this T-shirt, and I was blown away. And I didn't really get it because like all my friends, they were the scorers, and I was just the nerdy guy who dribbled the ball down the court and gave it to them. And I caught him in the hallway. I don't know if it was the next day or the next week. You know how your memories get fuzzy there. And his office was on the way past my locker. And I remember catching him, and I don't know, somehow I must have said, like, what was that? And I remember him going, Adam, you've got incredible leadership ability. And I'd never been told that before. I'd been told I was annoying. I'd never been told I had incredible leadership ability. So that, I store that up, but it gets even better because then, so from the end of my 7th grade basketball to the start of my 8th grade basketball, I grew 6 inches. So I was 5'11" at the start of 8th grade basketball, grew an inch since. That was after I graduated. So my high school basketball was dismal. But that meant that I was among the taller kids. And in the summer between 7th and 8th grade, I took his affirmation and was like, okay, I can play basketball. And my dad read that, and he put a hoop up out in the driveway. And my dad's kind of like me. He can't shoot a jump shot either. And we played a ton of basketball, but he's a railroader. His interest wasn't three-point shooting contests. He was like, son, I'm going to post you up, and you're going to try to stop me, and we're going to rebound against each other. And we played this really, some of you guys can appreciate this really like aggressive, hack each other to death, kind of underneath the basket style of basketball all summer long. And by 8th grade, I was really good at playing the low post. And I figured out early on, man, I'm mean enough, I'm aggressive enough, I've got pointy enough elbows, I can get a lot of rebounds and shoot a lot of bunnies. Don't give me the ball past like 2 feet away from the basket, but I can do that. And I figured out I could score. Like I could score some points. And that became my focus. And I remember one day, I caught Roger the day after a game where I'd scored 18 points or 16 points. I don't know what it probably was 3 points, but my memory tells me it was 18. Because have you ever seen that t-shirt, the older I get, the better I was? I think that's how it works. Anyway, and I stopped Roger and I said, hey, I had 16 or 18 or whatever. Did you hear how many points I had yesterday? I remember him looking at me. And there wasn't a scowl. There was nothing shaming, but he just kind of turned his head sideways and he said, how was your defense? How many rebounds did you have? Were you the first one up the court either direction? Did your team involved? Did you have any assists? And when I think of words that I treasure and things that shaped me, he taught me more about leadership and those couple interactions with his words than any conference I could ever go to. Listen, do you have those moments? Do you have those interactions? Do you have those words? Now let's flip it. The other category, there's what we treasure, and there's what's embedded, right? Like some of you grew up with a dad and he always called you lazy, and now you're this workaholic and you don't understand why you're a workaholic, but that's why you're a workaholic. Like what words are just lodged in your heart? I'm sorry, don't send me to psychotherapy and then ask me not to ask these deep kind of emotional questions. Seriously. You know that we all talk to ourselves? Like we used to think that makes us crazy, but here I'll just kind of relieve you. You're not crazy. Everyone you know talks to yourself too. Did you know that the words you say to yourself, they're not original? Like you haven't had an original thought? That what therapists and psychiatrists and what people who study this stuff are understanding more and more and more is the way you talk to yourself in the midst of your greatest successes and your greatest defeats. You're just parroting. You're parroting what you heard. Let me ask you, what's lodged? What hurts? And this gets into that kind of what comes first, chicken or the egg. Like, is it true of who you are? Or is it who you are because it was said to you? These become really, really big deal. Now, here's the point, because we're going to talk about a lot of different things as it relates to words over the course of the next month or so. But I just kind of want to get the gears of your memory bank rolling. Because really, here's the question that I want to ask. How powerful is language? Now, you know the textbook answer. But I mean, do you interact with words? Do you use words? Do you say words? Do you protect the words you hear with the level of seriousness that your whole memory just told you? That so much of who you are and so much of who your kids are, they reflect the words that you've used. Our friend Kate, our lead artist around here, who's not here this weekend, his name's not Kate, his name's Chris. He does a good job too, but Kate's in Denver doing some training stuff this weekend, and of course most of you know, but she's from Australia. And so proud of watching her kind of adapt to our culture, from Australia beaches and great white sharks to Montana snow and snow. You know where she struggled the most, and this is my opinion, as it relates to guns. Nerf guns, BB guns, AR-15 guns, 45 caliber guns. Like she's so accommodating, so comfortable. You bring up the word gun and she would just as soon leave the room. In fact, I was watching football with a group of people sometime during the football season, back when football was fun to watch, and there was someone had a bullet in their hand, and she walked in the room, and you'd have thought someone was sniffing a line of cocaine. It was just that foreign to her. Because she didn't grow up with guns in Australia. So this isn't political. I don't mean this social at all. But if you were to hand her a 45 caliber pistol, well, you couldn't. She would run. But if you could get her to take it, like I think she would literally be like, what do I do with this thing? Where's the safety? She'd be freaking out. Here's the question that I want to ask you this morning. Do you treat words like that? Because everything the sciences tell us, everything the scriptures tell us, they tell us that they're just as powerful. For good, for evil, they're just as incredibly impactful. And what I want to do this over the course of this next month is provoke you and maybe change some habits and provoke all of us to think about words in those categories. And what's fascinating to me is from the very first word of Scripture, God seems to grab hold of this thread. I think we miss it because when we read the first chapter of Scripture, we want to debate how old the earth is and whether or not evolution is accommodating and blah, 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 blah. We want this ancient cosmology to do all these things that I don't think it's reasonable to ask it to do. And in doing, we miss these brilliant observations. Listen to this in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now what experts will tell us is that the big thing being pointed out here is there was no functionality. There was God, and there was this blob, and there was no purpose, no meaning, no nothing. And what changed that? Let me just ask you, what changed that? Listen to the next verse. And there's this otherwise insignificant word. And God, what's it say? God said, let there be light. And there was light. You know what I think they observed? I think they observed what you just experienced. That the way you think of yourself, it was created by what someone said. The way you process information, the way you talk to yourself when you're sad or happy, when you've succeeded or failed, it was a reality created by words. Now, does this also tell us that God created? I think it does. But it's like these ancient peoples went, wait a minute, so there's something here, there's all this creation, there had to be a beginning, God must be at the beginning. How did that happen? Well, I don't know. But what we know is anytime there's something that exists, there was a word spoken. That just kind of has rocked my world for months. It's like, we look past them because they're not as sophisticated and they don't have our science, they don't have our microscopes, they don't have all the language and vocabulary, and we kind of look down our nose like they don't understand much. It's like they understood that if anything in the world exists, you can find a word that was said behind it. And they went, this God, he created. And then the text says you were created in his image. This God who could create something out of nothing with words, what did he equip you with? Words. I think God is warning us from the very first pages of Scripture, something that you know to be true emotionally and psychologically and spiritually, and that is words are powerful, incredibly powerful. There's a gal, so I did a ton of research, read a lot of books. It just so happens one of those books was by a gal named Joyce Meyer. I don't know if I can confess that up here or not, but anyway, I like Joyce Meyer. I just thought that you'd like to make fun of me that I like to read Joyce Meyer. I don't listen to her podcast. I didn't read the whole book, but she tells the story of her freshman year. In her freshman year, she was walking home. It was a Friday afternoon, Friday after school. Her thoughts were filled with things that she was going to do on Friday and on Saturday with her friends. Her friends had plans to get together for this big game of football in some park near her house. And as she was walking home, she type A, so she kind of motored by this guy who, this kid, he looked like a story from a bad after-school special. His backpack was clearly chock full. His arms were literally full of books and papers and binders and things, and he was walking down the street like this, and she didn't think much of it. She just, well, that's kind of odd, and she just kept going. And about a block ahead, she had to cross the street or something, and so she was able to look back. And again, like bad after-school specialist, she looked back, she could see that this kid was surrounded by a group of kids and that they were obviously harassing him, and before she could get a word out of her mouth or think, keep walking or whatever she could do, they had harassed him to the point where literally, again, bad after-school special, but it's really happened, like his books and everything were spread all over this front yard, and he was groping around on the ground trying to find his glasses. They had left. And so she, in this moment of compassion, she turned around and she walked back to this kid and she helped him find his glasses and handed him his glasses. She said, I'm sorry, those guys are jerks. And she helped him kind of scoop his stuff back together. And as she was doing that, they were talking, and she's like, well, I've never seen you before. Where are you from? He said, I went to a private school through 8th grade, and then I'm a freshman. I'm going to start going to public school. And, okay, and where do you live? And as they were gathering things, and she came to realize that he lived just about a block away from her. She said, I'll tell you what, I'm walking that way too. I'll help you carry some of this stuff home. And she said, quite honestly, as they were walking home, she just really liked the guy. She wanted to hang out with the guy. It wasn't like a romantic dating thing. She just liked him. And as she got close to his house, she said, tell you what, some friends and I, we're going to get together next Saturday or tomorrow afternoon and play some football in this park that's just like a block away from here. Would you want to join us? Like, I kind of like you. Sure, he said, I'll do that. And she said over the course of her high school career, this kid became her very best friend and a real central part of their people group. Hung out, did lots of things together. He kind of ditched the glasses and got a little help that way and turns out he was this really likable, really intelligent, really social guy. He was actually the valedictorian of his class, and she said he actually got a full-ride scholarship to Georgetown. And nobody from Laurel gets full-ride scholarships to Georgetown. And she said at graduation, he was real nervous, and they all just kind of assumed like he's nervous because he's got to give the speech. But he was like way more nervous. This guy had become kind of Captain Cool and super intelligent. And he got up there finally, and he said, graduation's the day that you thank the people who helped you get here. Your parents, your coaches, friends, whatever. And he said, I need to thank a particular friend. And he pointed Joyce out. And he said, nobody knows this story. He said, but my freshman year, the opening days were miserable. He said, in fact, they were so miserable that one Friday morning, I determined that night I was going to commit suicide. And I got everything out of my locker, and I loaded my bags up. And he said, my mom was a single mom. I didn't want her to have to come to the school and clean out my locker. And so I just had it all. And I was walking home, and he said, and I looked ridiculous. And these kids started screwing with me, and next thing you know, I'm looking miserable, laying in the front yard. And he said, man, it just confirmed everything I had decided. And then this gal, and he points Joyce out and said, she helped me put my stuff back together. And she said those guys were jerks. And then she invited me to their house the next day. He looked at Joyce and said, it was that night. Mom was gone. I had it all figured out. See, I think what Genesis is telling us is words are that powerful. They shape realities to such an extent. And part of what confirms what Genesis is saying to me is when embodied evil shows up, how does it show up? Like you've got this, right, like every story has its tyrant. Of course, the Bible has Satan. Percentages would say most of you don't believe in him. I believe in him. But nonetheless, there's this evil that's going to destroy all the good God is up to. And how does he go about it? What does he use? Listen to this in Genesis 3. Then the serpent was more crafty, so he was creative. He had every resource at his disposal. He could have done anything he wanted to sabotage what was going on. He was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. And he, what does it say? He said to the woman, did God really say? Isn't that fascinating that if you believe that Satan is real, if you believe that his evil is real, I do, but if you do, all the evil, all the destruction, all the disappointment, all of that, it originated not with a gun, not with a sword, not with any of that. It originated with a word spoken. Someone just had to say it. As a part of a memorial service this last winter, and one of the guys at one of the meetings, he was I think he was a son-in-law actually. And as I was talking to him, I learned that he worked in intelligence in the Air Force. He was a cadet in the Air Force. And I don't know about you, but when I get around people that are exponentially smarter than me, I just love to ask them questions. But I figured out when you ask these military people questions, they just clam up. And so when he said, I work for intelligence, and he works in the European theater, I said, so basically anything else I ask you, you can't answer, right? And he said, yeah, basically. So we start small talking, and his wife was there too, and they started talking about their desires to get back to the United States. And I said, well, what about Malmstrom? And he kind of laughed. He said, the only thing going on at Malmstrom is nuclear weapons. And nuclear weapons. And I don't know if you saw this, but about a year ago or 6 months, I don't know how long it was, in the last year, there was an audit on the security at Malmstrom Air Force Base. Did you guys see this article in the paper? Like they decided that they were going to audit and see whether or not the security measures in place for these nuclear weapons were actually sufficient. Turns out it failed. Well, that's kind of disturbing, and it was in the IR, and I thought, well, so I referenced this article, and I said, did you see that? His wife completely blew his cover. She said, oh yeah, my husband read about it in the Russian newspaper. I knew he was smart, and I should be talking to this guy. Everything you hate about pain, everything you hate about evil and darkness, it didn't start with a nuclear weapon. It started with a word. And something tells me that's your story too. You know, this thing I was a part of a couple weeks ago, it was this intensive with Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. They're the writers of Boundaries. And the thinking there was a couple hours of didactic a day and about 6 hours of full-on process group psychotherapy. I am messed up is what I learned. Really, really good. And their premise is that if we're going to be great leaders, we don't just need good information, but we need to be really, really well. I was thinking this week that in my process group, one of the people was an attorney who lives in the Bay Area, which is the most expensive place in the world to live right now, who owns a brokerage in the Bay Area, who the day before, the week before coming to this thing had closed on a deal for $640,000 more than the house appraised for. She said that's every week in the Bay Area. Another guy in my process group was this 50-something guy who played a really significant role in FedEx in the last couple decades. Now he's the chief coach to the owners of Chick-fil-A on the West Coast. I mean, these were these heavy-hitting leaders. I mean, there was me what do you do? I suck on my thumb most of the time. I mean, nothing. I have nothing to compare to these guys. And we processed some incredible stuff. There was rape that was processed. There was infidelity that was processed. Just deep, intense abandonment stuff. It hit me this week. Every one of their pains centered around words. I mean, there was physical stuff too. But even as I watched the gal processing rape, honestly, you know what was way more painful for her than the experience? The people who told her she was lying. The people who didn't believe the story. It's like words are powerful. In Psalms, I know this is heavy, sorry. I just don't know any other way to go. But in the book of Psalms, you know what the most referenced weapon in the book of Psalms is? Psalms is this book of poetry written mostly by King David, who spent most of his life running from a powerful army because they were trying to kill him. You know what the most referenced weapon in the book of Psalms was? It wasn't a sword, it wasn't a dagger, it wasn't a chariot. It was the tongue. David and the psalmist, they feared the tongue far more than they feared the weapons of their enemies. Listen to this starting in Psalm 55. Go ahead. Yeah, thank you. My companion attacks his friends. He violates his covenant. Now you're thinking man, this guy carries a heavy sword. No. His talk is smooth as butter, yet wars in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. He's not afraid of his sword. He's afraid of that guy's words. Listen to Psalm 57. I am in the midst of lions. I am forced to dwell among ravenous beasts. I know some of you don't like your spouse, but you don't describe him like that. But then listen to what he's talking about here. Men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp as swords. His issues with their tongue, with their words. In Psalm 59, they return at evening snarling like dogs and prowl about the city. See what they spew from their mouths. Their words from their lips are sharp as swords, and they think, who can hear us? It's the words that hurt. They sharpen their tongues like swords and aim cruel words like deadly arrows. They shoot from an ambush at the innocents. They shoot suddenly without fear. Deadly. powerful. Proverbs would be another place if you really wanted to study words, and Proverbs is this book of wisdom, and it's like one wise nugget of wisdom after another. The first thing it says is those who talk too much, they're doomed, which is why I'm always in trouble. Listen to this. The wise in heart accept commands, but a chattering fool comes to ruin. That kind of says it. Psalm 10:14, the wise store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin. Like, how many of us here would say that the most painful thing that's happened to us, the most treacherous circumstances we've had to navigate, they revolved around words? Things lobbed in our direction. See, the idea that I've been trying to say to myself for years, and I guess we're going to get into more specifics as we go, but here's the idea that I just kind of want to challenge you to sit with. And it's this simple idea that language changes lives. Who you are, it's a reflection of words said to you. That amongst all the beautiful, profound, incredible things you can do for someone, and listen, this isn't about blowing smoke. Like we're going to talk about that in a couple weeks too, like saying the right thing the right way and not being that person who's afraid to say the hard thing. But language changes lives. Who you are is a reflection of things said to you. So here's what I would like to do is, because they say that it takes 37 days to change a habit. Have you heard that? It takes 37 days to change a habit. And so really what I'm thinking in this next month is we're not going to become experts in talking like that. James is pretty clear on that. But I'm just hoping that we'll, rather than just have these dark or depressing or motivating sermons, that we'll actually kind of do some work. And so what I want to do is I want to get you a device, so to speak, that maybe will become a tool you can use. So the ushers, they're going to pass buckets on the end. And I just want you to grab one of these darts out of there and then just pass the bucket. So you don't get the whole bucket and you don't get to throw the darts at me. Though I did have someone say to me after the message, like, well, that was brave to give everybody in the room a dart. So I want everyone to grab a dart. And they're just going to kind of pass these things from one side to the other. They're real too, so don't throw them at me. Okay. This morning I have 2 questions and a prayer for you. How are you guys doing up there? You all good? Okay, because otherwise I was going to have to throw them your direction. I've 2 questions and a prayer for you this morning. And my hope is that you'll put this somewhere, whether that's your computer or your driver's seat or somewhere where just for the rest of the series, you're just kind of present with this thing for just a moment every day. This week, here's the first question is, what words are lodged? You know, like what are the things that have come at you and you've went to counseling and you've memorized verses and you've done any number of well-intentioned, you listen to sermons and you come to church and you volunteer at church and you scatter because we say like gather and scatter and all your problems will go away. Like you've done everything, you know. Listen, what words are lodged in your heart? What things said to you do you need to deal with? Here's what psychotherapy taught me. I know that joke's going to get old eventually, but it's going to be a while. Here's part of what I learned. Is the voices that you use to talk to yourself, they only go away when you confront them. And for some of you, you don't even know that you do it. We could ask this question, is the repetitive voice, is it the voice of grace or is it the voice of judgment? Like what's lodged in there? Some of you go, I don't want to go back to my childhood. Well, I don't know. I don't know where you have to go. But if you can identify the way you talk to yourself, there's a source behind that. And I think you got to deal with it. I think you got to ask God to forgive you for letting it in. I think you might have to go back to a person. You might have to sit down across from a friend and go, listen, whenever I fail in this way, I start talking to myself like this. I need you to call me on that. You might need to look at your spouse and go, here's the reason why I react whenever you say that, because that reminds me of something that a boss said to me 13 years ago. And what voices, what words are lodged in your heart? Because you can keep playing the church, read verses, read books, do that thing, but you got to deal with it. And then there's this. What word habits do you have? Have you forgotten how painful they are for those around you? What as parents, I mean, I know this, you're like, okay, I quit because I'm terrible. And I actually said that to one of the gals one day, one of the psychologists. I was like, I feel like I should just turn in my dad card because I'm now convinced that every one of my kids is going to have to go to psychotherapy because I'm screwing them up so bad. She didn't think it was funny. I meant it sincerely. She said, it's not true, Adam. She said there's big T and small t, big trauma, small trauma. Big trauma is actually easier to recover from, she said, than small t, small trauma. But she said, here's what messes kids up and here's what doesn't. She said, it's not about never being hurt. It's about never having those hurts cleaned up. She said, the people that we hear and the stories that we're telling, it's not because we didn't have perfect parents. It's because our parents said something and they didn't circle back to it and acknowledge it. What word habits do you have that maybe in the course of this series, God or your spouse, the Holy Spirit would like to prompt you and go, when you say that, man, that hurts. I yelled at one of my kids the other day. I'm really good at that. I could preach lots of sermons on it. And about 5 minutes later, I went, oh, man, I'm sorry. How does that make you feel? That makes me feel sad. Well, yeah, I know that because I grew up with that, and it's horrible. What word habits do you need to address? And then here's the last thing, and then I'll be quiet. Is I guess my hope is that every day you'll kind of prick yourself with this thing, and that you'll pray this prayer: Lord, would you make me wise with my words? Lord, would you make me wise with my words? Because I don't think of it, but I am just shooting an AR-15 nonstop. God, would you make me, as James says, quick to listen and slow to speak? Would you just, God, make me wise with my words? And here's what I love about God and I love about Jesus, is what he says is it can't be done alone, but I'd love to do it with you. That Christianity is not a self-help movement. It's a movement where we recognize the destruction that we've brought upon ourselves. And God steps in and he pays for that. He deals with it. That's what the cross is all about. It wasn't just to make nice jewelry. It was to actually deal with sin. And then he endeavors to partner with us. And here's the big thing. We don't go, okay, Lord, I'm going to clean up my language and clean up my use of words, and then you'll love me more. We go, Lord, you love me so much, and now I'm motivated to clean up my language and clean up my words. One is a voice of shame and judgment, and the other is a voice of grace.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.